The acid-green sky roiled above Station Nyx as Yuri Adams stared through the reinforced observation window, fascinated by the storm that had already claimed 13 lives. Droplets the size of pebbles splattered against the transparent aluminum, each one capable of burning through standard environmental suits in seconds. Enjoying the view. The voice behind him belonged to Station Commander Vrelix, a tall Kairian with deep blue skin and 4 eyes that blinked in alternating pairs. Most humans find our weather patterns disturbing. I find them fascinating, Yuri replied, not turning away from the window. On Earth, acid rain has a pH of around 4.2 to 4.4. From what I've read, these storms hit negative numbers on the pH scale. Vrelix moved closer, his exoskeleton clicking softly against the metal floor. Negative 3.2 at their most potent. Nothing survives direct exposure. Even our native fauna burrows deep underground during storm season. Yuri nodded, watching as a particularly large droplet exploded against the window, leaving a brief smear that the station's exterior neutralizing systems quickly eliminated. He'd been on Kairis IX for only 3 weeks, part of the first human scientific exchange program with the Kairian Confederation. The planet was a mineralogist's dream, rich deposits of rare elements that could revolutionize Earth's technology if only they could be safely extracted. The mining consortium lost another harvester yesterday, Vrelix said, gesturing to a distant plume of smoke visible through breaks in the acid clouds. Third one this month. The protection systems keep failing. What causes the acidity? Yuri asked, his mind already racing with possibilities. Atmospheric sulfur compounds interacting with our planet's unique microorganisms. They convert the compounds into something far more corrosive than anything in your solar system. Vrelix's upper eyes narrowed, which is why your request to examine storm samples is denied. Again. Yuri turned to face the commander. With respect, Commander, I believe I've developed a coating that could withstand the no. Vrelix cut him off with a sharp gesture. 13 dead already. I won't add the first human casualty to that list. The Confederation would revoke our exchange privileges. My research indicates this discussion is over, Dr. Adams. Vrelix's voice hardened. You're valuable to us as a mineralogist, not as a meteorologist. Focus on the samples we bring you from the safe zones. After Vrelix left, Yuri continued staring at the storm. Something about the acid's behavior against the window didn't match the official data he'd been provided. The droplets moved almost intelligently, seeking out microscopic weaknesses in the protective barrier. Normal acid, even superhighways, didn't behave that way. He needed a sample. And if Vrelix wouldn't authorize it, he'd have to find another way. The science lab was empty when Yuri arrived later that night. Most of the station's 23 scientists, 19 Kairians, and 4 humans were gathered in the communal area, celebrating the Kairian Harvest Festival. It gave him the privacy he needed. He approached his workstation and pressed his palm against the scanner. The compartment beneath slid open, revealing his personal project. A transparent container holding what appeared to be ordinary fabric gloves and a small vial. Computer, lock the lab doors and disable interior cameras for system maintenance. Authorization Adams Theta 9. Acknowledged, the computer responded. Maintenance mode engaged for 30 minutes. Yuri quickly pulled on the gloves. They were made of a polymer he'd developed based on his study of Kairian biotechnology and Earth's newest hydrophobic materials. In theory, they should repel the acid long enough for him to collect a sample. He approached the emergency airlock, a small chamber designed for quick equipment sterilization rather than human use. Technically, it could cycle a person in and out, but it wasn't built for it. That made it perfect for his needs as it wasn't monitored as closely as the main airlocks. Computer, prepare emergency airlock for exterior equipment sterilization. Warning, acid storm in progress, exterior access not recommended, override, authorization Adams Theta 9. Override accepted. Airlock cycling. Yuri slipped inside the small chamber, barely large enough for him to stand in. He'd brought nothing but the gloves and the specialized collection vial. The outer door hissed open, and immediately the howling wind of Kairis IX assaulted him. The storm was in full force, acid droplets sizzling as they hit the metal sides of the airlock. He took a deep breath and extended his gloved hand into the storm. A droplet hit the material and instead of burning through, beaded up and rolled off. The polymer worked. Quickly, he uncapped the vial and held it out, catching several drops of the virulent green liquid. As he capped the vial, he noticed something strange. Where the acid had touched his glove, tiny patterns were forming not burns, but what looked almost like writing. Before he could examine it further, the outer door began closing automatically as the 30-minute override approached its end. He withdrew into the airlock and waited as it cycled, neutralizing any exterior contamination. When he stepped back into the lab, he carefully placed the vial in a containment field. Computer, end maintenance mode. Maintenance mode terminated. Warning. Unauthorized exterior access detected. Security notification protocol engaged. Yuri swore under his breath. He'd have minutes at most before Vrelex or security arrived. He quickly removed the gloves and placed them under a molecular scanner, capturing detailed images of the strange patterns that had appeared. Then he downloaded the data to his personal device and hid the gloves. The lab doors slid open just as he was sitting down at his regular workstation. Vrelex stood there, flanked by two security officers. "Dr. Adams," Vrelex said coldly, "you've been outside." "I needed a sample," Yuri replied calmly. "My polymer coating worked, no damage." Vrelex's 4 eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "You directly disobeyed my orders and endangered yourself and potentially this station. The acid could have been carried inside. The airlock neutralization worked perfectly. There's no danger. That's not for you to decide." Vrelex's voice rose. "The sample will be destroyed immediately, and you'll be confined to quarters until we determine whether to send you back to Earth." Yuri gestured to the containment field. "At least let me analyze it first. Look at these readings. The acid's molecular structure is unlike anything in your database. Because our scientists haven't been foolish enough to collect storm samples at the height of season," Vrelex signaled to the officers. "Take Dr. Adams to his quarters and secure the lab." As they escorted him out, Yuri felt the weight of his personal device in his pocket. They might confiscate the sample, but he still had the scan data from the gloves. Something about those patterns nagged at him. They weren't random corrosion, they were too symmetrical, too consistent. In his quarters, Yuri connected his device to his terminal and enhanced the images of the patterns on the gloves. They resembled mathematical equations or perhaps a language. He ran them through the linguistic database, comparing them to known Kairian scripts and other alien languages cataloged during humanity's 50 years of extraterrestrial contact. No matches. This was something entirely new. His door chimed, and he quickly hid the device under his pillow before calling, "Enter." Dr. Alara Nivens, the mission's biologist and the only other human currently on this wing of the station, stepped inside. Her red hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her expression was a mixture of concern and exasperation. "Vrelex is furious," she said without preamble. "What were you thinking, Yuri?" "That I needed to see the acid up close to understand why the mining equipment keeps failing," he replied. "The official data doesn't add up, Alara." She sat on the edge of his desk. "That doesn't justify risking your life. Those storms have killed people. People in standard protection gear." "My polymer worked perfectly." He hesitated, then retrieved his device. "And I found something strange. Look at this." Alara studied the images, her brow furrowing. "These aren't corrosion patterns." "Exactly. They appeared almost instantly when the acid touched the gloves. It's like the acid was trying to communicate." She gave him a skeptical look. "You think the storm is sentient, not the storm itself, but maybe something in it. The microorganisms Vrelex mentioned, perhaps? Yuri paced the small room. Think about it, the acid behaves intelligently, seeking out weaknesses. The damage to the mining equipment isn't random, it always hits the control systems first. That's a big leap from unusual corrosion patterns to intelligent microbes, Alara said. Is it? We've discovered silicon-based life forms on Europa, gas giant floating organisms in the Procyon system. Why not microscopic intelligence in an acid storm? Lara handed back the device. Even if you're right, what does it matter? We can't communicate with microbes. But what if we already are? What if these patterns are their response to contact with my polymer? Yuri's excitement was building. I need to get back to the lab, I need more samples. Yuri, you're confined to quarters, and even if you weren't, Vrelex would never authorize more collection attempts. He sat beside her, lowering his voice. Then I need your help. You have access to the biology lab. If I give you the polymer formula, could you synthesize more? And the collection vials. You want me to risk my position too? Alara asked, though her eyes showed interest rather than refusal. I want to understand what's happening on this planet. Don't you? Yuri pulled up more data on his device. Look at the mining accident reports. Every failure follows the same pattern. Acid penetrates seemingly impenetrable seals, targets specific systems, bypasses others. That's not random corrosion. Alara was quiet for a long moment. I'll need the full formula and specifications, and if I do this, we do it my way safely with proper containment protocols. Agreed. Yuri quickly transferred the data to her device. We need to move fast before they send me back to Earth. After Alara left, Yuri returned to studying the patterns. If he was right, they weren't just dealing with a dangerous environmental phenomenon, they were encountering a new form of life, one that might be trying to defend itself against intrusion. 3 days later, Yuri remained confined to quarters, with only limited terminal access and meals delivered by security. Vrelex had informed him that a transport would arrive in 2 weeks to return him to Earth. Until then, he was barred from all research facilities. His door chimed shortly after midnight station time. When it opened, Alara slipped inside, carrying a small case. I've got them, she whispered, opening the case to reveal several pairs of polymer gloves and collection vials. And something else, I analyzed your original sample before they destroyed it. How? Vrelex had the lab locked down. I have friends in the Kairian science division. Not everyone agrees with Vrelex's excessive caution. She pulled out a data chip. The acid contains microscopic organisms with complex cellular structures, unlike anything we've seen before. They appear to communicate through chemical exchanges, and can reorganize their molecular bonds almost instantaneously. Yuri inserted the chip into his device, eyes widening as he reviewed the data. They're adapting to our protective measures. That's why the mining equipment keeps failing. These organisms are learning from each encounter, finding new ways to breach the defenses. But why? Alara asked. What do they gain by destroying our technology? Maybe they see it as an invasion. Yuri pointed to the mining accident sites on a map. Look, all the attacks concentrate on areas with the highest mineral content. What if these organisms need those minerals to survive? What if we're threatening their food source? Alara's expression turned serious. If that's true, we need to tell Vrelex. He won't believe us without proof. And even if he did, the mining consortium won't abandon this planet. The minerals here are too valuable. Yuri took one of the glove pairs from the case. We need to establish direct communication somehow. These patterns might be their attempt to speak to us. What are you suggesting? I need to go out in the storm again, not just my hand this time, my whole body, full exposure. Alara stared at him. That's suicide, even with the polymer. Not if we modify a full environmental suit with the polymer coating, Yuri argued. The gloves worked perfectly, and I'll bring collection equipment to gather more samples. Vrelex will never authorize it, which is why we're not going to ask him. Yuri pulled up the station schematics on his device. There's a maintenance airlock in Section 7 that's rarely used. Security checks it once every 12 hours. If we time it right, I can get out and back before anyone notices." Alara shook her head. "This is crazy." "Even if the suit works, what do you hope to accomplish? Understanding. Communication." Yuri met her gaze steadily. "Alara, think about what this could mean. A completely new form of intelligent life. If we can find a way to communicate with them, maybe we can negotiate, find a way to coexist." After a long pause, Alara sighed. "We'll need to modify a suit, and I'm coming with you to monitor from the airlock." The next day, they set their plan in motion. Alara brought components to Yuri's quarters piece by piece, and together they modified an environmental suit with the polymer coating. They worked through the night, testing each section for integrity. "The helmet's the most critical component," Yuri said as he applied the final layer of polymer. "If the acid penetrates it, then you'll have approximately 10 seconds of consciousness before the acid reaches your brain," Alara finished grimly. "Which is why you're taking this." She handed him a small device. "Automatic emergency injector. At the first sign of exposure, it'll deliver a neutralizing agent directly into your bloodstream. It might buy you enough time to get back inside. Let's hope we don't need it." Yuri examined the completed suit. It looked ordinary except for its slightly glossy finish. "What time is the next security check at the maintenance airlock?" 0300 hours. "They just completed one, so we have almost 12 hours. Yuri nodded. "We'll go at 0200, should give us plenty of time." They waited until the station's night cycle was well underway. Most of the crew would be asleep, and the skeleton staff would be focused on their regular duties. Avoiding the security cameras required precise timing and knowledge of their scanning patterns, which Alara had obtained from her Kairian friend in the science division. They reached the maintenance airlock without incident. Alara hacked the security protocols using the access codes she'd been given, temporarily looping the camera feed. "You have 30 minutes, she said as Yuri put on the modified suit. "Any longer and the security system will automatically reset." Yuri secured the helmet and ran a final check on all systems. The suit's internal sensors showed green across the board. "If anything goes wrong, don't try to rescue me. Seal the airlock and report a breach. Understand?" Alara nodded reluctantly. "Just be careful. This is still an untested modification. Science is all about taking risks." Yuri stepped into the airlock and gave her a thumbs up as the inner door closed. The outer door opened, and he stepped onto the surface of Kairis IX for the first time. The acid storm was in full swing, green-tinged droplets falling like heavy rain around him. He extended his arm, watching as the first drops hit the polymer coating. They beaded up and rolled off, just as they had with the gloves. Encouraged, Yuri moved further from the airlock. Each step felt momentous. The Kairian landscape stretched before him, eerily beautiful under the storm. Rock formations jutted from the ground like twisted sculptures, their surfaces etched by centuries of acid erosion. He began collecting samples, using specially designed equipment to gather both the acid and small amounts of soil. As he worked, he noticed that the droplets hitting his suit were leaving the same strange patterns he'd seen on the gloves. They appeared and faded quickly, like writing in fog on a bathroom mirror. Yuri activated his suit's recording system to capture the patterns. They seemed to be growing more complex, covering more of his suit with each passing minute. His scientific mind raced with possibilities. If these were attempts at communication, how could he respond? He remembered something from the data Alara had shared. The organisms responded to specific mineral compounds. He reached into his collection kit and removed a small vial of refined pernixite, one of the rare minerals the consortium was mining. He opened the vial and sprinkled a small amount onto his gloved palm. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The acid droplets converged on his hand, forming a swirling pattern around the mineral. The patterns on his suit changed, becoming more organized, more deliberate. Incredible, Yuri breathed, recording everything. "You're trying to talk to me, aren't you?" More droplets gathered on his suit, and the patterns began to pulse with a faint luminescence. They reminded him of neural networks, branching and connecting in complex ways. He noticed that when he moved toward certain areas, the patterns intensified as if directing him. Following this guidance, Yuri walked about 50 meters from the airlock to a cluster of rock formations. The acid droplets fell more heavily here, almost pushing him forward. At the base of the largest formation, he saw something that made him gasp. A pool of the acid had gathered, but instead of being a formless puddle, it had organized itself into a perfect circle. Within the circle, patterns similar to those on his suit swirled and changed, glowing with that same eerie luminescence. Yuri knelt beside the pool, fascinated. "You're showing me something. What is it you want me to understand?" He checked his timer. 15 minutes had passed. He had to be back at the airlock in 15 more. Carefully, he set up a recording device to capture the pool's movements and took additional samples. The patterns on his suit continued to evolve, now covering nearly every surface. As he worked, he noticed something disturbing. The polymer coating on his left glove was beginning to degrade where he had held the Pernix site. Tiny holes were appearing, and he could feel a warming sensation as the acid began to penetrate. "Time to go," he muttered, gathering his equipment. As he stood, the acid pool rippled violently, and the patterns on his suit pulsed rapidly, as if in distress. "I have to leave," Yuri said aloud, not sure if the organisms could understand him but feeling compelled to explain. "But I'll come back, I promise." He turned toward the airlock, but before he could take a step, a massive surge of acid rose from the pool, forming a column that towered over him. It didn't fall on him or attack, it simply blocked his path, pulsing with those same patterns. "I need to go," Yuri repeated, more urgently now. He checked his glove. The degradation was spreading, and he could feel a stinging sensation beginning. The emergency injector Alara had given him was primed and ready, but he hoped he wouldn't need it. The column wavered, then split into multiple tendrils that surrounded him. They didn't touch him but formed a kind of cage. The patterns on his suit intensified to an almost blinding brightness. Yuri's scientific curiosity battled with his survival instinct. This was clear evidence of intelligence and purpose. The organisms were trying to keep him here. But why? He looked down at his sample kit, then at the acid pool. "You don't want me taking samples?" Or, a realization hit him. "You don't want me leaving with the Pernix site?" The patterns pulsed once, strongly. "You need it to survive," Yuri continued, thinking aloud. "The mining is threatening your existence." Again, that strong pulse. Carefully, Yuri opened his sample kit and removed the vial of Pernixite. He knelt and poured it into the acid pool. Immediately, the tendrils withdrew, and the pool rippled in what almost seemed like satisfaction. The timer on his suit showed 5 minutes remaining. He had to get back now. He turned and ran toward the airlock, his heart pounding. The acid storm seemed to part around him, no longer hindering his progress. When he reached the airlock, Alara's worried face was visible through the small window. She cycled the door open immediately, and he stumbled inside. "Yuri, what happened? Your suit is covered in those patterns." "Help me get this off," he gasped as the inner door closed and the decontamination cycle began. "The left glove is compromised." Alara quickly helped him remove the helmet and then the glove. His left hand was red and blistered where a few drops of acid had penetrated, but the damage was minor compared to what it could have been. "We need to treat that," she said, reaching for a medical kit. "Later," Yuri insisted, connecting his recording device to the airlock's data terminal. "You need to see this first." The recordings showed everything: the responsive patterns, the acid pool, the column that had blocked his path, and his interaction with it. "They're intelligent," Alara whispered, watching the footage. "Not just reactive, actually intelligent. And they're trying to protect themselves from the mining operation," Yuri added. "The minerals we're extracting are essential to their survival." Alara applied a neutralizing gel to his injured hand. her movements automatic as her mind processed the implications. Vrelex and the consortium won't stop the mining based on this. They'll just develop better protection for the equipment, which these organisms will eventually overcome, Yuri said. It's an arms race they're destined to lose, unless what? Unless we can establish meaningful communication, find a compromise. Yuri winced as the gel began to work on his burns. The patterns are the key. They're trying to communicate with us, but we don't understand their language yet. And Vrelex won't give you the chance to figure it out, Alara reminded him. You're still being sent back to Earth. Yuri's expression hardened with determination. Then we need to make him understand before that happens, and I think I know how. The next morning, Yuri requested a meeting with Vrelex and the station's senior scientific staff. To his surprise, the request was granted, though he remained under guard when escorted to the conference room. "This had better be important, Dr. Adams," Vrelex said coldly as Yuri entered. "Your status hasn't changed. I believe I've discovered why the mining equipment keeps failing," Yuri replied, connecting his device to the room's display system. "And why the acid storms are so dangerous. We know why they're dangerous," one of the Kairian scientists scoffed. "The acidity levels are a defense mechanism," Yuri interrupted, bringing up his recordings. "Watch." The room fell silent as the footage played. When it ended, Vrelex's 4 eyes were wide with shock. "You went outside during a storm without authorization?" "Yes," Yuri admitted. "And I discovered that the acid storms aren't just a weather phenomenon. They contain intelligent microorganisms that are protecting their food source, the same minerals we're trying to extract." One of the Kairian scientists, Dr. Mexlin, leaned forward with interest. "These patterns, they're consistent with mathematical sequences. I believe they're attempting to communicate," Yuri said. "When I returned the mineral sample, they allowed me to leave. They understand trade, negotiation. Microbes can't understand concepts like trade," another scientist objected. "Individual microbes, no," Alara said, speaking up from her seat. "But as a collective intelligence, it's not unprecedented. The fungal networks on Praxis Roman 4 demonstrated rudimentary collective decision-making." Vrelex's expression remained skeptical. "Even if what you're suggesting is true, Dr. Adams, it doesn't change the economic reality. The consortium has invested billions in this operation." "I'm not suggesting we abandon the mining," Yuri clarified. "I'm suggesting we find a way to coexist. These organisms clearly need certain minerals to survive, but perhaps not all the ones we're extracting. If we can establish communication, identify which specific compounds they require, we might be able to focus our efforts on the others." Dr. Mexlin nodded slowly. "It's worth investigating. The polymer coating Dr. Adams developed already represents a significant breakthrough if we could adapt it for our equipment. And more importantly," Yuri added, "if we could use it to communicate with these organisms, establish boundaries, rules of engagement. It could be the first peaceful first contact with a microscopic intelligence." Vrelex was quiet for a long moment, his 4 eyes blinking in that alternating pattern that signaled deep thought. Finally, he sighed. "You disobeyed direct orders, endangered yourself and potentially the station, and violated at least 7 safety protocols." He paused. "But you may have also made the most significant discovery on Kairis Roman 9 since we established this outpost." Yuri held his breath. "I'm rescinding the order to send you back to Earth," Vrelex continued. "Instead, you'll lead a new research initiative focused on establishing communication with these acid organisms. But," he added firmly, "all future research will follow proper protocols with full safety measures in place." "Understood, absolutely," Yuri agreed, unable to hide his smile. "I want Dr. Nivens on the team as well," Vrelex said. "Her expertise in xenobiology will be valuable." Alara nodded, looking relieved that their unauthorized experiment hadn't resulted in more severe consequences. Over the next 2 weeks, Yuri and Alara worked with a team of Kairian scientists to develop improved polymer suits and communication methods. They established that the organisms responded most strongly to specific mineral compounds, using them to create increasingly complex pattern exchanges. Dr. Mexlin made a breakthrough when he recognized that the patterns followed a mathematical sequence, similar to prime numbers, a universal language that transcended biological differences. Using this insight, they began constructing simple messages, questions about which minerals the organisms needed most. The responses were crude but clear. The organisms required 3 specific compounds to maintain their collective intelligence. 2 of these were of little interest to the mining consortium, but the third Pernix site was one of the primary targets of the operation. "We need to find a compromise," Yuri told Vrelex and the consortium representatives during a virtual meeting. "These organisms can't survive without Pernixite, but they've indicated they only need it from certain regions. The richest deposits are in those regions," the consortium's director objected. "Yes, but our new surveys show equally viable deposits in the Northern Hemisphere, where these organisms don't appear to exist," Alara countered, displaying the data. "If we relocate operations there and leave the southern deposits untouched, both parties can get what they need." After much debate, a compromise was reached. The consortium would withdraw from the southern hemisphere and focus on the northern deposits. In exchange, the scientists would continue developing protection systems based on Yuri's polymer, ensuring more efficient extraction in the permitted areas. On the day the agreement was formalized, a massive acid storm rolled across the station. But unlike previous storms, this one displayed a distinctive pattern: concentric circles that rippled outward from the center, visible even from the observation deck. "They're communicating with the entire colony," Dr. Mexlin said in awe, acknowledging the agreement. Vrelex turned to Yuri. "I believe a final demonstration is in order, Dr. Adams, to seal our understanding." Yuri knew immediately what Vrelex meant. He donned the latest version of the polymer suit and stood before the main airlock, a symbolic gesture for the gathered scientists and consortium representatives. Outside, the acid storm continued, its droplets forming those same concentric circles. Yuri stepped through the airlock and onto the planet's surface, standing tall as the acid rain fell around him. The polymer suit repelled the droplets perfectly, the patterns now familiar and almost beautiful as they formed and faded. Then, in a gesture that made the watching crowd gasp, Yuri reached up and unlocked his helmet. Alara stepped forward in alarm, but Vrelex held her back, his 4 eyes fixed on the human. Yuri lifted the helmet off completely, exposing his face to the open air of Kairis IX. The acid drops fell around him but didn't touch his skin. Instead, they curved away, creating a small protective bubble of clear air around his head, and Yuri laughed a sound of pure joy and wonder that echoed through the comms back to the stunned audience. The organisms were protecting him, acknowledging him as the bridge between their worlds. "They said no one could survive the acid storms," he called back to the airlock. "They were wrong, we just needed to understand them first." For several minutes, Yuri stood there, face exposed to the alien atmosphere but untouched by the deadly acid. The organisms continued their display, creating beautiful, complex patterns in the air around him, a dance of acknowledgement between 2 very different forms of intelligence. When he finally returned inside, the scientists erupted in excited chatter. Even the consortium representatives looked impressed. "How did you know they wouldn't harm you?" Alara asked, her voice still shaky with residual fear. "I didn't know for certain," Yuri admitted. "But our exchanges over the past weeks have built trust. They understand that I fought for their survival. This was their way of showing they recognize our agreement." Vrelex approached, his posture conveying deep respect. "In all my years on Kairis IX, I never imagined the storms contained sentient life. Your human curiosity, what I once considered recklessness, has changed our understanding of this planet forever. 6 months later, the northern mining operations were running at full capacity, protected by polymer coatings based on Yuri's design. The southern hemisphere had been designated a protected zone where the acid organisms could thrive undisturbed. Research teams, led jointly by Yuri and Dr. Mexlin, continued developing more sophisticated communication methods. They discovered that the organisms formed a planet-wide network, sharing information instantly across vast distances through the atmosphere, a living, thinking web that encompassed Kairis IX. The acid storms still came regularly, but the station's residents no longer feared them. Instead, they watched with appreciation as the green droplets formed increasingly complex patterns against the window's messages from an intelligence they were only beginning to understand. On rare occasions, when important agreements needed to be formalized, Yuri would don his special suit and walk out into the storms. Each time, he would remove his helmet and laugh as the acid parted around him, a gesture that had become symbolic of the unique relationship between humans, Kairians, and the microscopic intelligence that shared their world. They had said no one could survive the acid storms. But through understanding, respect, and a willingness to listen to an alien form of life that communicated through patterns in acid rain, Yuri Adams had proven them wrong. And in doing so, he'd helped forge a new path for interspecies cooperation that would serve as a model for future encounters across the galaxy. As he stood on the observation deck, watching the latest storm create beautiful equations across the sky, Yuri reflected that sometimes the most profound discoveries came not from conquering alien environments, but from learning to speak their language and finding a way to coexist in harmony.